I'm so thrilled you guys want to learn how to knit. If you have absolutely zero experience knitting, but you want to get into it and you have no idea where to start, this is where you start. I'm going to go over what knitting is, what you can make with knitting, materials such as needles and yarn, and then all the different kinds of yarn, all the different kinds of needles, but then also other little accessories that I have like in my yarn bag. I'm also going to show you basic stitches so you can like actually get started after watching this video. You're going to learn cast on, a knit stitch, a purl stitch, and more. And then I'm just going to sprinkle in anything that comes up along the way. Right, let's get into it. Okay, so what is knitting? Knitting is basically the process of making a textile or a fabric by using needles and yarn and making loops over and over and over again. So you have this like beautiful fabric. And then you can make things with that like scarves, hats, socks, sweaters, balaclavas. I'm gonna show you some things I've knit just to get the inspiration going for you. Cardigan. I made this top. This is a balaclava. Wait, it's like a hoodie scarf thingy-mabob. And I like wearing it with this turtleneck sweater that I knit. And then I am currently knitting another turtleneck sweater. Oh, but you can knit a bunch of things that are not even clothing related. Placemats, dish towels, what else? Blankets, ornaments, literally so many options. My favorite thing though about knitting is that it is so creative. It is so relaxing. It's very like rhythmic. It is so rewarding. You go to a different place when you knit. Now let's talk about materials you need to get started knitting. You're going to need yarn and needles. There's a lot of different kinds of yarn and there's a lot of different sizes of needles, and I want to go over them. Yarn is categorized by weight, and what that means is like, well, how much it weighs, but also how thin or thick it is. This is mohair. It is literally like a thread, like it's so tiny and thin. This is like thicker. This is even thicker. In addition to how like thick or thin your yarn is, you also have synthetic yarn and natural yarn. Now when you're a beginner, I would suggest starting with synthetic yarn, basically because it's way cheaper. Synthetic would be like polyester, mainly acrylic. You see that in Michaels or Hobby Lobby. Natural yarns are like alpaca, wool, cashmere, cotton, mohair. But I wouldn't recommend the good stuff right when you're starting out because this is just, you just want to get into it, you just want to practice. I would actually suggest getting your yarn at a thrift store to start out because you can get like balls or like huge things of yarn for like $3. And then once you get the hang of it, I would suggest moving over to the natural fibers. They just feel better, they're more luxurious, just, I love them. First you'll see the material content on the label. These are both 100% wool. Next you're going to see a lot of numbers. First is how much your skein or ball of yarn weighs and its yardage. This helps you understand how many skeins you'll need for your project. The next is gauge, and this measures your tension. So if you cast on 20 to 22 stitches and knit in stockinette stitch, it should be 4 inches wide. If it's more than 4 inches wide, your tension is too loose. If it's shorter than 4 inches wide, your tension is too tight. Next is a needle size that's recommended to use with the yarn. Now let me show you on this other label from Denmark. Sometimes the labels include little symbols on them to make it easier to understand all the numbers going on. You can also sometimes find washing instructions. And then these are super helpful. So the color number is to help you identify which color yarn you choose. And then the lot number helps you choose yarn from the same batch of yarn that was dyed together. Now for needles, there's 2 types of needles. The classic little sticks who look like little chopsticks and you just knit like this. Or you have circular needles. They're attached, and this way you can use these to create circular things like the body of a sweater or a sleeve or a sock or something tubular. You can't create circular pieces like the body of a sweater or sleeves with these kinds of needles, but you do with these by attaching the stitches in a circle and then just knitting in the circle. But the versatile part about these needles is you can also use them like these, but you can't use these like these. So personally, I like circular needles because I just think they're more versatile. But in addition to just which needle type you prefer, there's different sizes of needles, so different thicknesses. And then with the circular needles, there's different lengths. Like there's this, for example, but there's also really small ones for socks or sleeves. Or there's like ginormous ones if you're doing like a body of a sweater. The bigger or thicker or wider the needle, the bigger the stitches. And then the smaller or thinner the needle, the smaller the stitches. To be honest, if I were you, I would start with a size US 7/4.5mm needle. It's this size. I just feel like this feels so good in the hand, and it's small enough to look really nice. I find the big needles to just be like, oh, so much in your hands. Needles will often have the size on the needle itself. You'll have the US size, like US 5, 6, 7, and you'll also have the metric size, so 4.5mm. Okay, but in addition to needles and yarn, you might want some other things. So let me show you what I have in my little knitting pouch. Here's my little pouch that I carry with me every time, everywhere I do a project. There's only 4 things in here. These are called stitch markers. You place these in your knitting to signify a change in the pattern or an increase or something. Next, I have a tapestry needle. I use this to weave in my ends. That's like the loose ends that are just hanging out and you weave them back into the project. I also have a pair of scissors. Now, these aren't the best scissors for cutting yarn, but they work. There's ones specifically for yarn that are like way sharper. And then lastly, I have a measuring tape. This is just to help when I make like swatches or just to measure how long a piece is. You want it floppy, you don't want it like a hard measuring tape. Okay, let's get into knitting. I'm gonna teach you 3 things. 4 things. 1 is a slip knot. 2 is how to cast on your yarn, so how to put the yarn on your needle to get started. Next is a knit stitch, and next is the purl stitch. Okay, watch what I do to make a slip knot. Cross the yarn, then take your right index finger and pull the right yarn through the loop, and then pull the left yarn to tighten. And then this is what's called the long tail cast on method. There's like a bunch of different kinds of ways to cast on, but I find that this is like 1, it's satisfying to do, but 2, it looks the best in my opinion. So you're gonna start with the slip knot, and then you're gonna put it on your needle, grab the bottom, 2 fingers through, pull down, and then we're gonna go under here, and then around here, and pull through. Boom. That's your first cast on. I'm just going to show you a couple more times here. But now, what happens when your tail is just absurdly long and you wish it was shorter, but you don't want to just cut it off and waste that yarn? Well, what you're going to do is start with about 2 inches of yarn and then hold that to your needle, and you're going to wrap the yarn around as many times as you want to cast on. So I'm going to wrap it around 10 times because I want to cast on 10 stitches. For the knit stitch, insert your needle from the front left to the back right in the first loop. Then wrap the yarn around the needle and pull through. Then slide it off. This method of the knit stitch is called the English version, by the way. It's when your working yarn is in your right hand, and when you wrap the yarn around, you're kind of like throwing it around the needle. So sometimes it's called throwing. There's this funny saying to help you understand like how to do a knit stitch. You stab it, strangle it, scoop out its guts, and then throw it off a cliff. It's great. Now the second method of a knit stitch is the continental version. This is when you hold the yarn in your left hand and you wrap the yarn in front of the needle and around, or you can kind of like reverse it where you use the working needle to pick up the yarn and pull through. I typically use this when I want to knit faster. For the purl stitch, first put the yarn in front of the needle. Whenever you're doing a knit stitch, the yarn is in the back of the needle, but whenever you're doing a purl stitch, the yarn is in front of the needle. Then you're going to insert your right needle in the front of the loop, wrap the yarn around, pull through, and then off. We refer to the front of the work as the right side, abbreviated RS, and we call the back of the work the wrong side, abbreviated WS. When you continue the pattern of knitting on the right side and purling on the wrong side, you create what's called a stockinette stitch. And by the way, when you make a knit stitch, it always creates a purl stitch on the other side, and then likewise, if you create a purl stitch, it creates a knit stitch on the other side. Okay, so now what happens if you knit and purl on the same side in the same row? Well, it's something called ribbing. Ribbing is typically used at the end of arm sleeves, the bottom of sweaters, or at the neckline, and commonly at the beginning and end of a scarf. You can do any variation of ribbing, but these are the most common, and I'm going to show you how to do a 2x2 ribbing because I think that one is super chic. You're essentially just knitting 2 and then purling 2. But when you flip your work to the wrong side, make sure you purl the purls and you knit the knits. So here I'm actually going to start by purling 2 and then knit 2, and then purl 2 and then knit 2. The last thing to know is how to bind off or end your work. You're going to knit the 2 stitches. And then insert your left needle into the first stitch on your right needle and then loop it over and off the second stitch. Then knit 1 more stitch and repeat that whole process. When you make it to the end, you're going to have 1 more loop. Just cut off your yarn a few inches down and then pull that right out and you're done. Now this is just the absolute basics of knitting and something to get you started with. But there are other stitches and other things to learn for more advanced designs, like for my balaclava, or sweaters, tops, etc. Just remember, be patient. Don't think you're gonna do a perfect job the first time you try, like me, because I always think I'm gonna do a perfect job and I don't. It's a learning process. It's totally new, but the important thing is that you just keep trying. And also, like, ask me if you need help. If you want to start on a project like right now, I would say make yourself a scarf, because essentially it's just one long rectangle. But I hope you have so much fun. Thank you so much for watching. I hope this was super helpful and you feel like more confident to actually start knitting. Bye!